Okay, well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this special webinar event from the US Study Center. I'm Simon Jackman, a professor of political science and the CEO of the United States Study Center here at the University of Sydney. And of course, the United States Study Center stands on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people, who are part of the Eora Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. It's Thursday, the last Thursday of November, and that's Thanksgiving. Certainly here in Australia, it's a Wednesday night on the East Coast of the United States, Thanksgiving Eve. But what we wanted to do was a repeat of a wonderful event that we did last year when circumstances were different and we could meet face-to-face. Last year, the US Study Centre stood up an event at Parliament House in Canberra where the US Ambassador, A.B. Culvahouse, was gracious enough to join us. And it was a fantastic turnout from both sides of the House, of Parliament House, both sides of the aisle, as it were, to take the opportunity of Thanksgiving, but to use the occasion of Thanksgiving as a prism for reflecting on the past 12 months and the future of the US-Australia relationship and all the benefits it delivers to both countries. We thought, what better way to do that towards the end of the work year in Australia as the Parliament and Australia gets ready for the summer, but use that occasion of Thanksgiving to again, a retrospective and a prospective look. And that was a wonderful event. Of course, this year's circumstances are different, but turning adversity into opportunity, we're able to use this technology now, not just to have A.B. Culvahouse with us again from Canberra, who I will properly introduce in just a moment, but we're also joined by Arthur Sinodinos, Australia's ambassador in Washington, who is bracing for Thanksgiving festivities tomorrow. So let me do some formal introductions and get the event underway. We're enormously gracious to the time that the two ambassadors have given us, suffice to say, at reasonably short notice. I should add too, our minds have been elsewhere, suffice to say, with events in recent weeks, and we might get to that as well. But A.B. Culvahouse was nominated by President Trump to be ambassador to Australia in November of 2018, confirmed unanimously by the US Senate on January 2nd, and sworn in February 19, 2019, and took up the role with the formal presentation of credentials to Australia's Governor-General on March the 13th of 2019. And quite simply, the ambassador is the President of the United States' personal representative to the government and to the people of Australia. And in so doing, he leads the US mission to Australia, which not only has the embassy in Canberra, where the ambassador is today, but I believe, but the three consulates in Melbourne, Sydney, and Perth. Ambassador Culvahouse, or AB, as he's come to be known here in Australia, as a long and distinguished career of government service and service in the private sector as well. He has formerly chaired a major international law firm, O'Melveny and Myers, over 4 decades of association with them. But his career in public service goes back to the Reagan years. He began as chief legislative assistant to Howard Baker, and then later as White House counsel to President Ronald Reagan. President Reagan recognizing Ambassador Culvahouse's service with the Presidential Citizens Medal. And then later in 1992, then Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney awarded AB the Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service for his work on the Federal Advisory Committee on Nuclear Fail-Safe and Risk Reduction. Both President Trump and the late Senator John McCain tapped Ambassador Culvahouse to head their respective searches for running mates. That's a very big job and speaks to the trust with which political leaders in the United States have regard AB and why he was such an outstanding pick for ambassador here, and a proud Tennessean. If you ever met AB, you don't go long in AB's company without understanding AB's from Tennessee, but a graduate of the NYU School of Law. Arthur Sinodinos is Australia's ambassador to the United States of America and has been in that role since February of 2020. And previously, Arthur had served as Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science and a senator in the Australian Parliament from New South Wales for 8 years, from 2011 to 2019. Arthur had also had some big jobs away from the ministry, but as Assistant Treasurer in the ministry, rather away from Cabinet, but one of his cabinet roles, and it was a really important job in the Australian system of government, is Cabinet Secretary. And a career in public service that dates over 4 decades now. Critically, from the perspective of the United States Study Center, Arthur was Chief of Staff to John Howard for 9 years. Towards the end of that period was when the United States Study Center was conceived by and with the Prime Minister John Howard, indeed one of the founding fathers and prime movers for the establishment of the center back in the mid-00s. Prior to that, Arthur had worked with Mr. Howard in opposition as senior economic advisor, and Arthur's career in public service began working in the public service in the Treasury. I wasn't aware of that till we got the full bio. Arthur's also had spells in the private sector, working with Goldman Sachs, JB Weir, NAB, and various others. He's a recipient of the Order of Australia for his distinguished service to Australian politics and government. The development of economic policy and reform, and of course to the Greek community here in Australia. I want to thank you both, gentlemen, for your time, and both of you sort of bringing different perspectives to bear. The running from where you both sit, an American in Australia representing the United States, and an Australian representing Australia back in the United States. Terrific sort of set of perspectives to bring to Thanksgiving, a nice reciprocity here as I think befits the mission of the center and what we're trying to accomplish today. The running order is for some opening statements, some remarks, some observations from each of you, and then we'll get into some questions from myself. But AB, if we could begin with you. Thank you for your time. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Thanks, Simon. It's always good to be with our friends and partners, and the U.S. Study Center. It's an important relationship for us. It's one that we value. I too fondly recall the Thanksgiving event at Parliament House, because it was an opportunity to talk about the demonstrable strides that had been made in the alliance during 2019. And of course, Arthur Sinodinos is a friend, in every respect a partner. I often find that when we've got these little ankle biter issues that could become fissures in the alliance, that I can reach out to Arthur, or he can reach out to me, and we can make them go away. I think I consider part of my job being sensitive to fault lines and fissures before they become something more important, and Arthur and I can often deal with those. Let's talk about 2020. It's thrown a lot at us. It's as I say, it's been a biblical year for Australians and Americans alike, and biblical as in the Old Testament. We are prone here at the embassy to talk about the bushfires and the smoke as if they occurred a decade ago, as opposed to this very same year in which we find ourselves. And so for the Americans, for many Americans, Thanksgiving looks very different, and we've faced unprecedented challenges that have touched the lives of everyone, one way or another. We've faced a global recession, increased strategic competition, and of course the pandemic. And we've seen threats emerge in new and different ways. On this Thanksgiving Day, at least here in Australia, it's important that we give thanks for friends. Friends matter, and friends matter a lot. And the United States has no better friend in the international order than Australia. And we are thankful for that relationship. Partners you can trust, and Australia is a partner we trust. Australia shares our values, our interests, and Australia's been with us through good times and bad, and we are thankful for that. We look after one another, we stick together. We don't, as we often have to remind ourselves that we do have differences, but as friends, we work through those differences, and we stand together. Australia's made difficult decisions in the past year to build a safe, secure, and prosperous future for this country throughout the Indo-Pacific and globally. I have famously or infamously said once upon a time that we wish that Australia had the confidence in itself that the United States and as Australia. I no longer say that because I think Australia has stepped up and has taken the lead in so many ways, and good on you. Together we stand in this region for shared democratic values. We're developing new innovations that will power our economies out of COVID, and we're ensuring the peace and prosperity of our region and the world. Our relationship will continue to be a force for good in the world for years to come, no matter what the challenges are, and we will take advantage of the opportunities that we face. Let me talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, and that is the election. But I view, maybe because I have a little hair, gray in my hair, and because I've participated in every election since 1976, every presidential election, when all is said and good, all is said and done, we should celebrate that more than 160 million Americans made their voices heard. We had more participation in our presidential election than ever before. It's the largest number of Americans who participated, and I think it's a clear vote of confidence by Americans in the democratic process. The process continues to unfold. States are certifying the winners. Our electoral college doesn't meet till December 14, which will officially designate the president-elect. So from my point of view, our constitutional process is working, and it's working remarkably well, and it's working as our founders intended, and as the creators of our Constitution over 240 years ago intended. Our elections are often heated, they're often complex and intense, and I've seen my fair share. I was a close observer of the 2000 recount in Florida, and I would just point out that we are already farther along in this process today than we were in Florida in 2000 when a transition was not authorized for 37 days. So I feel that democracy is alive and well in the United States. And I am also confident that the United States will emerge stronger than ever. My great friend, first employer out of law school, the person who took me to the Reagan White House, Howard Baker, used to talk about the self-correcting genius of the American Republic, which operates every election almost. I remember I once was bemoaning to him in a midterm election that I thought there had been a huge overcorrection. And this was when my party had won a huge midterm victory and had captured the House. And I said, Howard, I'm a little afraid of instability here. And he looked at me and he says, Culvahouse, I taught you better than that. I taught you better than that. That's the self-correcting genius of the American Republic at work as our framers intended. Our framers did not view when they created our Constitution to create a more perfect union as an end state. It's a constant journey. And it's a journey that that reflects the dynamism of the American Republic. Let me talk a little bit about the alliance. Our alliance is not one of convenience. It's not a transactional alliance. It's one that's built on trust. It's one that's built on shared ideals, our belief in democracy, our belief in individual freedom, human rights, the rule of law. It transcends political divides. And it's a generous alliance. It's an alliance that cares about people in the region and in the world, and that wants freedom, prosperity, respect for sovereignty, freedom of navigation over flight, and shared generosity for everyone in the region. I'm particularly grateful, as I said, for Australia's confident leadership in the world in the past year. Australia has led the way, has shown real leadership in countering foreign interference and disinformation and cyber aggression. It stood up for freedom of navigation and overflight in the South China Sea, for the rights of the Uyghur people in China, for the civil rights of the people of Hong Kong. Australia continues to support the Pacific Islands. One of our priorities is to support Australia's leadership in the Pacific Islands, and we have work to do in the post-COVID world in the region. And Australia also is increasingly showing leadership in Southeast Asia. So the alliance, I give the alliance high marks. We want, and let me say, our alliance is open to all, and we want freedom, prosperity, and security to be available to everyone. We are not excluding any country, including our great strategic competitor to the north. On the economic front, there's work to be done. The pandemic has brought new challenges into sharp relief as we face recession, supply chain shocks, and economic coercion. I am grateful that our two countries have resolved to help both Australia and the United States and other like-mindeds to grow and innovate our way out of the COVID crisis. At the Osmond Ministerial consultation, where Arthur and I attended in Washington in July, it is fair to say I think it was the most consequential Osmond of our time. We reached farther and made demonstrable progress on key industries like medicines and critical minerals to make those supply chains more resilient and resistant to economic coercion, as well as isolating them from the use of forced labor and substandard environmental safeguards. We are also together deepening the robust innovation and high-tech R&D that underpins our economic relationship and supports long-term economic growth. Our commitment to pushing the frontiers of technology and exploring space means that our alliance will continue to produce the high-skilled, good-paying jobs of the future. Similarly, I give thanks this year that Australia signed the Artemis Accords, the Space Accords, as a founding member. This enables our two countries to cooperate even more closely as we seek to put the first woman on the moon, to return a man to the moon, and to work towards the first human mission to Mars. This year, I'm grateful for the efforts of our two countries to promote the peace and security of our region and the world. Authoritarian regimes increasingly seek to exploit our democratic openness and transparency through malicious activity in cyberspace and other malign behavior. in response, at Osman and since, our two countries have recognized the importance of countering disinformation. That was a critical readout and to-do from Osman. And we've created a group to monitor and to respond to false narratives propagated by bad actors. Also, from Osman, we agreed to have a force posture working group that are working together to modernize and our force posture cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, citing the Marine Rotational Force Darwin as an example of what we need to do more of. So in balance, particularly against the backdrop of a really difficult year, we have a formidable roster of shared democratic, economic, and security values and aspirations and achievements. So on this Thanksgiving, I am grateful for all that we've done together. I'm grateful for the candor and the increasing cooperation. If you think about it, there are so many Five Eyes working groups. There's so many bilateral working groups. There is so much being done by Australia and the United States, and Australia is showing and is leading in many of these respects. So it's been a great year for the alliance, and I look forward to talking more about it during the Q&A. So over to Arthur.
Thanks very much. I think Simon was going to introduce me. But he got
I was, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
I was on mute and you jumped in. Go for it, Arthur. Thank you.
Sorry, guys. My apologies.
And thanks, AB, for a great summary of some of the cooperation during the year. And thank you, Simon, for the opportunity. The fact that you got quite a big group of people together for this webinar at short notice, among other things, shows the pulling power of the centre as well, and it's going great guns under your leadership. In terms of this year, from my point of view, part of my Thanksgiving is actually getting here, as in getting to this point in the year. If you told me at the beginning of the year we were going to have a pandemic, the biggest economic contraction since the Depression, racial protests, a bitter and divisive election campaign, what seemed to be like the longest transition in the history of humanity, I think I would have said, is that all happening in 1 year? But it has happened. And, you know, while there's, I suppose in a sense I'm joking about it, what I'm finding here in the States is that people are, I think, relieved to be getting to the end of the year. And I think a lot of people are thankful we have actually survived, because COVID here is still raging. It's gone through a second wave, as it were. So for a lot of us, our physical security and health, that of our family, the people we work with, friends, etc., has been very strongly in our minds. So you've got that overlay of anxiety on top of the anxiety induced by other things happening around us, as I alluded to before. So I'm thankful in a sense that we've gotten to this point. I'm thankful that the year is almost finishing. I'm thankful that we've adapted to this environment we've been in, that we've learned better how to work from home, how to be disciplined and be socially distanced and exercise appropriate hygiene and everything else. We've learned a lot about our own character, I think. And when you do that and you learn from that, you should be thankful for that. So I'm thankful for the fact that we've been able to progress the alliance through this very difficult period. People didn't throw their hands up. They decided, no, if we can't do this physically, we'll do this virtually. Or in the case of Maurice Payne and Linda Reynolds, they made the decision, we are going to come for Osmin. It's going to be a physical Osmin. We will go back and quarantine for 2 weeks, because that's the value we place on the relationship. And I think it's very important to understand that those decisions are not taken lightly. And as AB said, very consequential Osmin, but in a whole variety of ways. The way we cooperated during the pandemic on personal protective equipment, making sure supplies were free flowing, making sure no glitches, no misunderstandings. We really learned to work better with each other. And I think those lessons we can take into the post-pandemic recovery. And I'm quite thankful, having been over here in election year, because I've learned so much about how this place works. And this place is different to Australia in so many ways. We're similar in a number of ways, and those similarities mean that our relationship is organic, it's not forced, but we are still different countries. And the privilege of being here in election year is to understand the importance of the Constitution, the importance of the rule of law, the understanding people have about the separation of powers, the checks and balances, the fact that people here take all of this very seriously. And it's something that comes out of the history of the United States, a history of revolution, a history of civil war. I mean, you know, people have really, you know, put their lives on the line for these sorts of things. And you see it up close, particularly in a year like this. So I'm thankful we've been here for that and have that learning experience. I'm also thankful that as we look forward, there's hope. We get through the winter, come the spring, there's a vaccine, things start to lighten up, and we can start to do more things physically. And that will also accelerate recovery, because what I've seen this year is that while the US economy has gone through a slowdown, there is tremendous power in the US economy. And the amount of firepower that is now stoking up because of the high levels of stimulus in the system, saving rates here are very high. Once people are really confident that COVID is under control, you will see how quickly that recovery will again gather pace. Very important to understand that. And that goes to my, I suppose, penultimate point, which is I'm impressed how resilient the American economy actually is. And I think one of the points that's come through to me this year is this narrative of American decline is, I think, a false narrative. There's a great dynamism here, but that dynamism is wrapped around massive change that is going on. Demographic change, the city-rural divide, a lot of urbanization occurring, parts of the country which have been hollowed out because they haven't benefited as much from globalization. That's the sort of backdrop to understanding some of the forces that have been at work here. So looking at political figures and saying this or that figure is a disruptor, in a sense, is misplaced. You have to understand why are political figures thrown up by the forces of the day and what it is that we need to do to address those forces. My final point is about this question of division in the US. There was division during the campaign, but this is a voluntary voting system. In a system like this, you've got to get out the vote. You've got to maximize turnout. You've got to galvanize your bases. You've got to push their buttons. It's different to the Australian system in that regard. So of course, division will be more on display, exacerbated by the way the media has become balkanized, no doubt about it. But the important point is the division's been on display, but if I can echo Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal, but look what happened. 160 million people, as AB said, went out and voted. And they voted for a combination of a relative moderate in the president-elect and a Democrat majority attenuated a bit in the House and a likely Republican majority in the Senate. The message they were sending is we want you to work together. And that's, if you like, a centrist message. And that's a message of hope in a sense. It's not my role to be a commentator on American politics, but as you see those trends, they're part of the reason that give you optimism about the future of this country. That the country can come together, have a bitterly contested election, this is the outcome, and then a new agenda comes forward and people move on. And from our point of view, as alliance partners, it's not so much about risks, it's about what are the opportunities that this agenda creates to build on the strong relationship we have and the great strides we've made under this administration over the last 4 years. I'll leave it there. The Q&A is always the most interesting part.
Thank you, the AB, and thank you, Arthur. I had teed up a question, sort of the elephant in the room question, but you both did a fantastic job, I think, of speaking to, the election, and Arthur, I think the the demonstrable compassion in your remarks about COVID, and the toll it continues to take in the United States, and I can only imagine what conducting diplomacy, the challenge for a new ambassador and the rest of the team to lob down in the middle of that. And so we give thanks to the hard yards you and the rest of the mission have been engaged in, because it's been a remarkable year, as both of you pointed out, and we'll get into this now a little bit. In the middle of all that, despite that adversity, it's been a remarkable year for the bilateral. The Osmin was enormously consequential, even from our distance as spectators from the other side of the world to it. And we might probe that, I think, a little more than dwell on the election. I thought, though, both of you touched on the dynamism of the American Republic, to use AB's words. And I think that's a really important thing for Australians to remember. The last observation, and this is the political science professor, can't help himself here, and but a dual citizen as well. America is born of revolution and revolutionary ideas, and you forget that about the United States at your peril. Its founding is a diametrically opposed story to the Australian founding in some ways, in many ways. And when you think about America and you see that tumult that boils up during an election like the one we had and the year we've had, remember, you've got to put that in some historical context, and remembering that America is born of revolution and a commitment to revolutionary ideas. You keep that front of mind if you can. After centuries of pointing to the First Amendment and the Second Amendment and the rest of the Bill of Rights and subsequent amendments to guarantee liberty and freedom and due process and all the rest of it, you forget that they were of their time, and in many parts of the world today are revolutionary ideas, taken by the people, not granted by a benevolent legislator or monarch. Very different founding stories for the two countries. Anyway, that's enough editorializing from me. Both of you reflecting on Osmin, and AB, I think, touched on this. The way we see at the US Studies Center, we're sort of inventing words for it, but alliance evolution, the way that, and AB also alluded to the way the Five Eyes working groups are standing up in other domains, like what is, I think, over a lot of its life been primarily, we say capital A alliance, we point to the military defense to defense relationship, the intelligence sharing relationship, but that now becoming increasingly from where we sit as a US Study Center, and I throw this to both gentlemen, we see, and the last Osmin perhaps being the most clear demonstration of that now becoming a platform for broader and growing avenues of cooperation. I'm wondering if you could both elaborate a little bit on that, some of the things that we might not be so aware of, particularly when you bring, it's so much part of the fabric of Australian strategic thinking and what we teach kids in history classes in Australia, ANZUS, 1950s to the present, but it too is dynamic. And I'm wondering if maybe AB, we could just go in the order of the opening remarks. If I can invite you to elaborate on some of those alliance dynamics as you see them, and perhaps as came to the fore in that Osmin.
Well, first, just let me pay a tribute to the Australian government. I think the Australian government is, post its election last year, has given considered and consistent thought to how it sees the world and the region. Prime Minister Morrison has on more than one occasion has talked about using, whether it's Five Eyes or Five Eyes plus two or G7 plus two, but using existing existing like-minded partnerships and to expand them to as the foundation for economic development in the post-COVID world. As the foundation for development in emerging countries, as to build to provide relief, to provide vaccines and therapeutic treatment in the Pacific and in the Southwest, Southeast Asia. So I think what you're seeing is the Five Eyes has worked well. And some of the older and larger international organizations have been frustrating for both countries. So we've resolved to do a couple of things. One is to create situational alliances, if you will, or situational groupings is a better word, Simon, of like-minded partnerships to fill the void, while at the same time, and this is something that we did agree on, Osman, is to think more thoughtfully about international organizations and trying to together and with other partners to reorient them back to their missions and to have them once again be forces for good and for constructive conduct. I mean, the U.S. has given up on the World Health Organization because we feel like it cost us 5 critical weeks of preparation for the pandemic, but we haven't given up, and Australia has not given up on many other organizations, and we are working together. So I do think what you're seeing is both bridging the gap in terms of providing the immediate relief that needs to be provided in the post-COVID world, while attacking international organizations together to make sure they're working for the benefit of everyone.
Thanks, AB. Arthur?
Thanks. I'm a lapsed economist, and we used to see the world as being economics was here, trade policy was here, security policy was over there, and never the twain shall meet. But that's not the way the world is today, as you alluded to in your question. So you're right. When we look at AusMin, we think about how will AusMin evolve, because at the recent AusMin, there was a lot of talk about things like industry integration between our two countries, creating sovereign capabilities, trusted supply chains. How do we do that around critical minerals? How do we cooperate in critical technologies? Technologies which have national security implications. And as you know, Simon, we've increasingly been putting foreign investment restrictions around some areas because of the geostrategic competition that's going on. And so for us now, this cross-cutting of national security and economic issues means that we've got to find a way to promote a dialogue on that. One of the things we're thinking about, frankly, is how do we have a strategic economic dialogue with the US, which brings together this cooperation in these sorts of areas? And I'm thinking of AI, machine learning, quantum computing, hypersonics, critical minerals, etc. In some areas, we're making more progress than others. Critical minerals is more advanced. AB talked about space. A lot of work we can do together in space. So what's happening is, out of the alliance is being born this focus on all those technologies which, in the world that's evolving, are becoming the subject of geostrategic competition. And we have this debate going on about decoupling between the US and China. Now, no one thinks there should be complete decoupling, but there is this issue about military-civil interaction in various technologies. How do we protect ourselves? And that's, AB was alluding to this, we're having to come together in the Five Eyes and other contexts to think about, well, what are trusted supply chains in those sorts of areas? And what does the internet look like going forward if we want to protect it from the way some other countries want to use the internet or balkanize the internet? And what do we do about sensitive technologies so that we can have a scale up. And by investing together, we have a force multiplier effect. So that whole debate now means that the alliance is evolving in ways which perhaps may not have been envisaged, as you said, when ANZUS was signed.
Yeah.
But for us in Australia, it's a great opportunity because we have great science and research. So we've got a great basis on which we can contribute and participate in this relationship. So it's an opportunity rather than a risk, but it means working with the US and with other trusted partners.
Thanks, Arthur. And indeed, look, what you said about that, it's the way that, you know, lapsed economist that you are, that heretofore division, you know, intellectually, substantively between trade and investment over here or security stuff over there. That's one we've embraced at the US Study Center. It's so clear from both Washington and Canberra. You know, the way we have organized ourselves, the mission set, if you will, for the US Study Center is adapting exactly along these lines that you're talking about. So just a bit of advertising for the center and our agenda in all this too. Thanks for the opportunity. Look, I'm wondering, there's one of the questions we thought we'd put to you both is just in recent weeks, we've got the election and COVID, of course, but of course the other thing is that the heat in the China back and forth is there, you know, of course, and indeed, even as we've been dealing with these other matters, you know, we've got Australian coal currently, may or may not, subject to environmental review or whatever the words are, but back in Washington, you know, the fact that Australia is being subject to economic coercion is the sort of the word of the, you know, that's falling from the lips of many commentators, both in government and out of government in Washington. I'm just would love to get some perspective on that from both of you, but you know, what can and should the two countries, you know, do to mitigate some of this economic coercion? One of the things we are doing, and what might be some of the additional things we might be doing. And if I could start with, again, AB, perhaps could I come to you first on that one? You indeed, your remarks yesterday, I thought were on point. So this should be top of mind if it wasn't already.
Well, I may have gotten a little out over my skis yesterday, but I think the PRC's economic coercion threats and actual, and I'll let Arthur speak to what is real and what is spoken, but it's been concerning to watch. And it occurs to us that at least and it's wolf warrior diplomacy that the PRC is looking to make an example out of Australia, and that's quite concerning. But it also shows that the threat that an autocratic government who can use the whole of country. I mean, these SOEs are not, they're part of the government. And what used to be a lot of the private PRC companies are now part of the government. And so use the whole of government to advance their strategic policies. And it looks like that that they are engaging in actual economic coercion against Australia, and that is quite concerning. It also shows what can be done in strategic supply chains. Arthur mentioned critical minerals. We are dependent upon different experts and both our governments count differently, but whether it's 6 or 16 or 24, there are critical minerals that we are dependent upon. I was just up at the Newcastle at RAF Williamtown the other day. There was a new delivery of F-35s coming in. There are 430 something pounds of critical minerals in each and every one of those airplanes, and the processing for a fair number of those minerals right now it goes to the People's Republic of China. the word industrial policy does not come out of my mouth easily given my politics, but we're going to have to engage in that. We are. And our two countries together with China, I'm not China, with Canada and with others, have comparative advantages, but we're going to have to pick some winners and to provide some support. And we're going to have to make sure that in the next pandemic that we are not looking around and trying to figure out where we're going to get our masks, our shields, our ventilators. So but it's going to take the people rolling up their sleeves, working together, and say, these supply chains are strategically important, and they may be, quite pedestrian, but without masks, you really can't deal with a pandemic, and we're going to have to deal cooperatively. But I'll let our lapsed economist speak more intelligently as he will. I do think I think we're going to have to engage in some industrial policy, and we're farther along in critical minerals, but a lot of other frontier technologies, and then pharmaceuticals. A lot of the basic ingredients for pharmaceuticals, we don't have strategically reliable supply chains, and we're going to have to figure that out.
Thanks.
Thanks, AB. Look, from where we sit, we want a strong and prosperous China. It's in our region. It's a big power. It's going to keep growing one way or the other. This is not about containing or making it a permanent number two, but this is about how we have a reasonable dialogue with China about how it fits into an international system that we can all live with. In other words, where there's a common set of rules and where you don't just set the rules because you happen to be the strongest. We've been the beneficiaries in Australia of the fact that the US, in one of the most unselfish acts of history, of enlightened self-interest really as well, put up the global rules-based order in 1945, which encompassed both friends and enemies. That was the great lesson out of Versailles. And that system is not just a cliche, it's a whole series of rules around law, trade, law of the sea, IP, you go through the list. These are all the things that allow countries to work and live with each other peacefully and prosperously. And what we are saying to the Chinese is that, yes, we want them to be part of it, but there are rights and there are responsibilities. And going forward, if we don't want to be picked off in the way that perhaps some are saying with economic coercion, it's best if we and like-mindeds work together. Now, part of it may be, as AB said, through critical supply chains for critical technologies. That's part of it. But part of it is just making sure that China knows that by working together, we are promoting that rules-based order. So, for example, whether it was Trump 2.0 or a Biden administration, we were going to come back to the US considering its membership of the Trans-Pacific Partnership in due course. We know that's not on the agenda early on because trade at the moment is a bit of an issue in the States and there's more of a focus on getting the domestic economy more competitive. But the Trans-Pacific Partnership without the US is like Hamlet without the prince. If the US is in it, the US gets to set the rules for the region in a way that promotes open trade and investment. That's what makes for quality economic recovery. So from our point of view, the signal we want to send out to a future administration is very much keep engaging. Bring the old band back together again. The allies have to be together and work together and the like-minded. If we do that, the calculus of benefit and cost for China will change. The weight of numbers, of population, of GDP will have an impact. But we have to show that we're working together.
Yeah. Hamlet without, I'm going to use that one. Thanks, Arthur. The TPP, yeah. Very, very good. What I want to do, we're down to about 10 minutes to go. So I want to just make sure we cover off two matters, and one is, I mean, polls that our research at the US Study Centre shows this, but younger Australians seem, you know, less enamored, or less understanding, or less appreciative of the alliance, and other democratic institutions, by the way, in general. At the same time, though, it looks like, you know, we've seen a bit of, you know, different polling in the US suggests that there's sort of, if anything, more support for alliances, and like many things in the US, that does fault on partisan lines. But for both of you, Arthur, just AB rather, pardon me, based on your time in Australia, just your read on that as you've been ambassador and around the country here. What is it that young people aren't getting necessarily, and perhaps what should be done about it? And I guess Arthur, you've seen that from both sides now as an Australian politician and working, you know, alongside, in particular, John Howard for a long time, at a moment where the alliance was under great strain and in the Iraq War. But now as ambassador, I just appreciate your observations on sort of this age gradient, if you will, around the alliance, support for the alliance.
Great question, Simon, and we've talked about it, but our polling, you know, I mean, your polling, other polls in Australia, our own internal polling,
sure,
shows that the under 30 cohort in Australia is less supportive of the alliance, and for that matter, somewhat less supportive of democracy than other Australians. I think it's because, I mean, some of the faults with us, it's the alliance is not as relevant to younger people, I think. We need to freshen it up, and I think reaching out economically, broadening the alliance to make sure that people understand that we're working together on the innovation economy, working together on space, on frontier technologies. We're working together on the jobs of the future. Most Australians still don't know that the United States is their largest and most important economic partner. Yes, China is the largest trading partner, but we, U.S. direct and foreign investment in Australia provides about 7% of the GDP, according to this the Deloitte study. So and part of it is, I think we just got to reach out to the younger Australians, find more in different ways. And I'm not so sure that we have figured it out, particularly with the diverse media. But we need to make it relevant to younger Australia, because all of this hard work we're doing, these hard yards, as you said, is for them. It's for them. You know, Arthur and I both believe in the alliance. You don't have to convince us. We need to, we need to convince them. There is a little difference between the United States, but in the U.S. But I think and part of it is to use it, since we're talking about old movies, but it's like the inspector in Casablanca said, you know, the Nazi colonel just got shot to round up the usual suspects. I think some of our outreach is to the usual suspects, and we need to do more to reach out to parts of the Australian populace that don't hear from the American ambassadors, that don't hear that much about the alliance, but what we do together is so fundamentally important to them.
Arthur.
Well, I think it's a very interesting question. I think young Australians know a lot about the US in terms of culture.
Yeah.
A huge amount.
Yeah.
I think in that sense, they get the US on that basis, but that whole broader strategic stuff we're talking about here, to some extent, has become a backdrop. It's sort of part of the furniture, and maybe it's taken for granted. It's a bit like the arguments around globalization. Every so often, you've got to refresh the arguments and explain why something is what it is, and what is it used for, and how is it relevant to people's needs going forward. So the question for the alliance going forward is, okay, yes, security is important, but what is it doing about economic benefit? What is it doing about the climate? What is it doing about X? What is it doing about Y? You always have to think about relating what you're doing to what people's concerns are. But I find among young Australians, a lot of them very keen to come here.
Yeah.
Very keen to work here. And, you know, it's a cliche, but it's true. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And I still marvel at the Australians I see, you know, through Advance and other organizations who are doing great things here in the US. And, you know, frankly, that is the US's best advertisement, is those people-to-people links. Because when people come here, they see how different it is to what they see on television, which is always, or the media, which is always focusing on negatives.
That perhaps gets us close to our end point. And look, there's nothing better than Thanksgiving, frankly, I'm just reflecting on my own first years in the US. Couldn't believe Thanksgiving. Just what an event that was, where, oh, there's some young Australian guy is studying. There's no way he's celebrating Thanksgiving on his own. People would take you into their house,
yeah,
and just expose you, and that generosity of spirit. And that good on you, Arthur, for putting that in play towards the end of our time here, because it's such a vital part of the relationship, and can't wait till we can get traveling again, and all the expatriates that have come home and
they all come back.
If they could go back to New York, thanks, that'd be great. Although, nice little hit to the real estate market here as they're looking for a place to live. But well said, Arthur. It's a huge part of the story. We tend to focus, as is natural in a conversation like this, on the big heavyweight, the free trade agreements and the ANZUSes and the rest of it and the OSMINs. But one thing I learned straight away running the US Study Centre, being here in Sydney, the business community, number one, who are transacting the lifeblood of the relationship hour by hour out of the Sydney CBD and Melbourne and whatnot, yeah. All of that, and the investment flow between the two countries, number one. But then the people to people that I'm, you know, myself, I'm kind of a case study to no small measure. Look, last question, we're down to about 2-3 minutes, and I just thought we could perhaps put a Thanksgiving theme around this if you like, gentlemen, but a common misunderstanding Australians have about the US, and maybe vice versa, might be a nice way for our audience here, a mix of Australians and Americans, to hear from both of you. And I'll let you swing at that however you see fit, with the Thanksgiving theme in mind or not, but AB, yours.
Well, sometimes, I mean, Americans, we are excessively confident. We speak in broad brush terms. I find a bit of what when the U.S. government talks about that we wish allies would do more, we wish like-mindeds would do more. The natural instinct of Australians is that we're talking about them, and no, we're not. Almost invariably not. We're talking about. I mean, Australia is our. You know, we say it and we mean it. That Australia is our closest friend, our closest, one of our closest, very closest allies. And I'd probably say that if I was ambassador to London too, but probably maybe not, because I wouldn't survive very well there. But it was. But I think. We could be a little more careful, but on the other hand, I do think Australia has so much capacity for leadership, and Australia's been showing that. But we would like to see Australia. I mean, it is hugely respected in the United States. It's hugely respected in the region, and I'm thankful for that on this Thanksgiving Day.
Well said. Arthur.
Well, look, while we must never be smug about our values, the sort of liberal democratic values that we share in common are important for everybody. I call them decent, humane, universal values. And a time like this is to give thanks for those sorts of values and for the things we can do to advance those values. And we reflect on a century or more of mateship, and the fact that people have laid down their lives for these values. So for me, it's a time to reflect on that. And just very briefly, James Wolfenson has passed away. Great progenitor of the relationship between Australia and America, typical of the great cross-fertilization. And today I'm also thankful that Kylie Moore-Gilbert has been released by the Iranians. Finally, great diplomacy quietly behind the scenes by our people. But again, thankful for all the things we do to try and get people freed, get them to exercise their freedom, and contribute together, the two countries, towards a better world.
Great note to end on, Arthur. That was great news coming, and well done. I'm sure a lot of people behind the scenes have been working their tails off on that one. And let me thank you too, by the way. That was a remarkably frank and informal exchange. I was really struck by it, and let me thank you for that generosity. Often, if we'd done this at Parliament House, it probably would have been a little more stuffy than this. But this had a great flow to it and great back and forth. And I'm sure everybody on the call picked up on that. Just remarkable. And it's a shame we only get to do it once a year, but maybe it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe we could have chats like this a little more often. But terrific that we did it. Thank you for the hour you've given us. Happy Thanksgiving there at the embassy, Arthur. I know you've got you've got plans later in the day, and good luck for tomorrow, Arthur Sinodinos. Thanks. Up at White Oaks there. Enjoy the day.
Look forward to it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.